All right, thanks everybody for your. John asked me to talk a little bit about the people side of leading innovation. So I'm really going to pick up a lot on the theme about inspiring people, the theme about the consent authority, and talk about how we can do that as people who are leading innovation. So who am I? Why would it be appropriate that I talk about this? So I spent 25 years in corporate innovation. I spent 20 years with a company called Alcoa. For those of you that are local, you may know them. They're a global aluminum manufacturer. And I spent time in operations, technical support, and innovation. And then I spent 3 years as a chief innovation officer for a stainless steel company based in Europe. I had a team of about 150 people located in three places, 2 in France and 1 in Brazil, and managed a $500 million innovation portfolio with that organization. So I know a lot about innovation and about leading teams from 3 people to a couple hundred people. So I'm going to talk to you about some best practice leading innovation through some of my own personal stories. Sometimes I did it well, sometimes I did not do it well, and hopefully through my stories you can get some tips for yourself. And then just other things that lived and worked all over the world. Those black circles are places where I've either lived or worked or both. I've got one in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean because for the last 2.5 years I was commuting from Knoxville to Paris every other week. And so I felt like I basically lived in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And then the other couple things to note about me, I'm a mother, I've got 2 kids. They're 11 and 13, and then I'm very active in the nonprofit here in Knoxville. I sit on the board of 3 nonprofits, 2 of which I sit on with Brand. I've worked with Girls Inc. on their strategy, and up until April, I was doing all this corporate stuff, and now I've gone on my own. I wrote a book recently about women in technology. It's part of a series of books on diverse talent and helping them to grow in their careers. And so the success of this first book that I published at the beginning of the year, I launched that, use that to launch my own company. So I create content to help people grow their careers. Okay, so just to set some context, in my 25 years, I've really developed my own framework for leading innovation. And it's based on 4 components: how you select what you're going to work on, how you develop those ideas into real tangible things that you can then sell, how you execute those projects to meet the schedule, the budget, and the quality standards, and then the leadership, how you actually lead the people involved in this whole process in order to get them to execute on your vision. So today we're going to talk about the last part of this framework. I like to think of the people in innovation in 3 buckets. It's completely arbitrary, but I think it's useful because really getting the most out of these people requires some different levers. So it's helpful to think about it in these 3 ways. So first of all is yourself. As John talked about, you need to know yourself, your own leadership style, things that you care about, how you show up to other people. The second group I'm going to call the makers, and I use that term deliberately. These are the people that are creating and touching your core technology or your core business model or whatever it is that is unique to your business. I think most of the people in here have some sort of, technology, but it can be a new business model. It can be whatever it is that is the core, the heart of your business. You would not outsource these people. And then you have an ecosystem. There are people that you need to help you bring your vision to reality. These can be inside your organization. These can be people like HR, legal, finance. They can be outside your organization. They can be your mentors, VCs, all of those different things. But these are people that may not be inside your organization, but your vision, your technology, your innovation is not going to make it out into the world successfully out this ecosystem to help you get there. So I'm going to take each of these in turn and talk about some of the tools you can use to make sure that you're leveraging those people to the best of the ability to get innovation. So first of all, let's talk about the ecosystem. I think everybody here would agree that innovation is not a solo task. It takes a group of people. And the key here is to, first of all, know who your ecosystem stakeholders are and engage them. So I'm going to start by talking about a time I did not do this correctly. So fairly early in my career, I was in charge of strategic raw materials, carbon raw materials for Alcoa. So this is a smelter in South America. This is the one that I created the $2 million problem for. My job was to help develop the manufacturing process is already developed, but help identify raw materials, make sure they all worked well in the production of these carbon electrodes, these large blocks. These are needed to actually go from aluminum raw materials to actually making liquid aluminum. And in my dissertation, I'd actually identified a material that could be used that was actually cheaper. And at the time, I was spending $1 billion a year on this carbon material. I found a way to use something cheaper. So everybody was super excited about that. So I identified the material, I tested it in the lab. I did large scale production tests, and then found that we could use this material, we could buy this material from China. They had an abundance of it at a low cost. So I went to China, took my team, went to the actual production facilities, made sure all the quality control was in place, and we were ready. So we bought 400,000 metric tons of this stuff. And we said, we're going to ship it to 4 of our locations. We're going to save $30 million over 2 years. And we're going to let the suppliers of this material know that they can't gouge us on price anymore. Okay, so that sounds like a great plan. And I had identified all of my stakeholders and got approval up to the highest levels of the organization, procurement, operations. Everybody was on board. The first 2 locations that we sent this to, everything was great. And the 3rd location, that happened. So rather than being able to make these big blocks, we got piles of rubble, basically. Very expensive problem, a safety issue to fish this out of the operations, causes thermal balance issues, electrical balance issues, and at the end of the day, this South American smelter had a $2 million problem. I get called up to headquarters. Angelique, what'd you do? And I told them, okay, here was my plan, here's what I did. And I had failed to talk to the local in China transportation team. They would have told me that there were some anomalies with one of the suppliers we were targeting, and like the certificate of analysis coming out of that facility and the certificate of analysis of what we got once it got in the boat and crossed the water were sometimes different. So had I talked to them, I could have put countermeasures in place to actually take additional samples, make sure we tested things when it arrived. But I didn't do that because I had been there and I knew better, and I didn't need to engage those particular stakeholders. Now, fortunately, when I explained everything to the powers that be, they said, well, you saved us 28 million, so that's still good. That's still pretty good. So we're going to let you keep your job. The plant manager, on the other hand, held a grudge. And so 2 years later, when he became my boss, he made my life pretty difficult for a couple of about 18 months before he moved on. So this is an example of when you don't engage some critical stakeholder players, bad things can happen. There tends to be 2 failure modes when you talk about why we don't do this. So in some cases, you might not know who all the stakeholders need to be, particularly if you're playing in a new space. You might not understand whether or not you could be heading into regulatory issues, or whether or not you could be heading into legal and compliance issues. And so fortunately for you all, you have the community here, right? And you have mentors, and those people should be helping you to really identify who needs to be aware of what's going on in your project and who can help you along the way so that you avoid any potential pitfalls. The second failure mode is sometimes just not engaging these people at the right level. And I'm on LinkedIn a lot, and this survey came through my feed once, and I just loved the way it was phrased. It says, as a corporate innovator, I would rather get a poke in the eye than have to deal with, and then there's a list of different stakeholders, right? Human resources or sales or legal and compliance and finance in this particular case. But the sentiment behind it is, I know best, and when I start talking to these other people, they slow me down, or they create roadblocks or other reasons to just avoid them altogether. The problem with avoiding them is that in reality, when they're raising these challenges and slowing you down, it's because of their own expertise. It's not because they don't like innovation. It's because from their lens, they see a challenge that can be a problem for you. So if you're not engaging with them, what could be a low hurdle that you have to jump in the short term can end up being a wall that you run into in the long term. So the key here is to leverage your network and of mentors to understand who those stakeholders are, and then engage them. Make sure they're fully aware of your project. Make sure you're engaging with them early and often. The other thing that I would suggest that you do is treat them as people that you also have to. You need to build consent authority with these people, because oftentimes when you have a big crisis or even a big opportunity, it's the people that are out, on the periphery of your team that can make the difference. They can reduce time to get certain paperwork done or contracts done, things like that. And if they don't feel like they need to put themselves out there to do anything extra special for you, you're going to miss this opportunity to maybe go after some opportunities because you really haven't built a consent authority with these people that you really kind of treat like external to your organization or external to your project. And then, of course, as you're building your organization, you need to take care, because it will often be that the people that are at the core of the technology will start to say, okay, we don't need to talk to them. We don't need them. So you need to make sure that as the people building the culture in your organization, you're recognizing, okay, who do we include in our inner circle of discussions? Who do we include in the celebration of our wins, and making sure that you're inclusive? Okay, the second group is what I call the makers. So it was actually interesting. I had a mentor when I was at Alcoa. It was actually the chief financial officer of Alcoa, was for a while. And he asked me, how do you manage the creativity of your team? How do you keep that going? And that was really the first time I'd ever really thought of the scientists and engineers in my research lab as creatives. Like the thought, you see the white lab coats or sitting behind their computers, sitting behind their 5 computers running CFD models. And I'm like, in reality, he was right. And when I started to think of the people in the, creating the innovation as true creatives, and thinking about, okay, well, what do creative people need in order to keep their creative juices going, and how do I encourage that? Things started to change, started to get more ideas, better ideas, ideas that would run through our process more quickly. because I was creating a creative environment. So the ways to do that, first of all, to actually protect the environment itself, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, and then to celebrate wins. So when you're talking about protecting the creative environment, there's really two main things: your space and your time. So in terms of the space in which you create, I mean, we have world-class facilities here. So I think that is probably something that you all have ready access to, and you just need to make sure, okay, is our work environment, when I come here, do I feel energized? Do I feel like I can collaborate? Do we feel like we can get our creative juices going? If not, then you might need to address that. But the one that can be a bigger challenge is time. So maybe you all have read the very famous blog post from Paul Graham from Y Combinator. He talks about this tension between people who are managers and the way we like to schedule. So we like to have a bunch of meetings all the time, quick updates on everything, just schedule things based on whatever fits. We're just looking for holes in our calendar. And makers, and in this case, he was talking about coders, but I've seen this again and again with all types of innovation, whether you're, creating something that we consider technology, or you're creating something, a new business model. You need time to think, process, maybe analyze your data, make your coding, make your whatever it is that you're making. And that's a completely way to schedule your time. So what I found in my organizations was by actually promoting, okay, we're gonna adopt a periodic maker schedule. We're gonna make sure that certain people in the organization who feel that they really need this can have at least half-a-day blocks where we're not gonna schedule meetings. We're gonna let them do what they need to do. That had a significant impact on our ability to not so much ideate, because ideate is often a collaborative activity, but then to take that list of the brainstorm and actually do something with it. Now, it may be that some of the people in this room are the ones putting the pressure on your ability to actually create some kind of maker schedule. But I think as leaders, and many of you are wearing both hats, you need to take care here and feel free to push back on organizations that may be putting pressure on your desire, your ability, or your need to really have more of a maker's schedule. And then the second is to celebrate wins. So there's research, again, from Harvard that talks about how the progress principles, celebrating even small wins, is good for all employee engagement. So all leaders should be doing this just in general, regardless of whether you're in an innovation space or not. But it's even more important for us because we're in a low probability of success field, right? I mean, the chances of our ideas working the first time or the second time, maybe all is pretty low. So for people to not get demoralized, not get demotivated, we need to make sure that we're identifying and celebrating even small wins. And sometimes as leaders, we have to look for them, right? So we all have projects, we all have project milestones. And so hitting those project milestones are pretty obvious wins. And we need to make sure that we take time to celebrate those, both as individuals, but also as team members and as leaders. But sometimes you have to look for things to celebrate. And this is one of my favorite examples where the SpaceX team had their prototype, one of the first prototypes they actually tried to lift. It lifted and it came down and exploded. Although it was branded as a RUD, rapid unscheduled disassembly, which I think is an excellent term. But immediately Elon Musk comes out and says, congratulations for getting the data. That was a win. So can you imagine, I mean, this is a multi-million-dollar prototype that is now in pieces. And the leader says, congratulations, team, to the whole world of his, I don't know, 5 million Twitter followers or whoever many people follow this guy. Now, who knows behind the scenes what he told them? So, but this, you know, had to make the team feel good. And so it was not obvious to anybody who watched this video that this was a win for them. But he found a way to celebrate a piece of it that was meaningful for his team. And they came back and did it again and again and again. And then the other thing, maybe going to touch on the point that John mentioned, you know, all the work that I do now, which is really a lot of talking to people who are underrepresented at work and giving them the tools to succeed. One of the things that they talk about is we feel excluded from the celebrations. So celebrate the wins. And if you really want to take things to the next level, be an inclusive leader and pay close attention to how you celebrate, because not everybody likes all the same activities and who gets invited. So let's make sure that everybody in the team gets invited, including your ecosystem stakeholders. And then you are both implementing a best practice, but then you're not inadvertently turning it into a way to divide the people in your organization, with a way for some people in your organization to not feel like they're actually as valued as others. So an easy way to do that is to ask what they want. And I will tell you, one example that my team had, so this was my Brazil team, we had just finished a product launch of a new grade of stainless. And so they're all located there in Brazil. Of course, I'm here, and they had a couple local celebrations. And then they said, you know, Angelique, we want you to be included in our celebration. Great. What do you guys want? And it was interesting. They wanted an unscripted meeting with me, which I thought was interesting. They called it an open talk. And I was like, well, what's an open talk? And they're like, it's an open talk. Well, what's the agenda? There's no agenda. You're going to get on a Zoom call for an hour and we're just going to ask you whatever we want. Okay, if that's a party for you guys, okay, we'll do it. And then they actually posted it on LinkedIn and the screenshot, and it really meant something to them that their leader would be open enough to just talk about whatever they wanted to. First of all, to give her extra time, was of our scheduled meetings, wasn't part of our work. I gave them an hour of my day. And I've showed a level of, in their mind, respect and openness to not have this meeting be scripted. And, you know, it's kind of like an ask me anything thing. I mean, I think people do that. They call it an open talk. So they wanted to talk about LinkedIn, because I'm really active on LinkedIn. And they're like, you know, how do you get people to like your stuff on LinkedIn? So they want to talk about family. They want to talk about, you know, what I really thought about the Europeans. So because our headquarters is based in Europe, and so there's this disconnect between the Brazil team and the European team, and you know, what was it really like to work there, and then stuff about my family. So I mean, it wasn't anything controversial or anything, but and the whole team was invited, and you know, we had to translate some of it because some of the lower, you know, the technicians that work on the floor don't speak English. And I don't speak any Portuguese. So to them, that's how they had an inclusive celebration. It was free. Okay. And so then the third part, you. And, you know, like John said, you have to understand who you are. And the interesting thing about I found about leadership and personal leadership, sometimes you're the last person to understand how you show up as a leader, everybody else is watching you, right? They're seeing how you're behaving, they're seeing your actions. And sometimes it isn't until you're not even aware of how you're coming across to other people. So sometimes you can get lucky and you can have people on your team who will tell you, who will reflect back to you what they're seeing. And that's a gift, regardless of what they say, that I think everybody should really embrace. But when you don't have that, you actually have to start doing some of your own digging. You really need to, get into the real critical emotional intelligence tool and try to understand, build your self-awareness and understand who you are and how you're coming across to people. So who am I? I've had it several times when my own leadership was tested. And, this is one in particular where we had a big project in Saudi Arabia. So my team had developed a way to increase the production of aluminum without having to build brand new aluminum line, production line. So it was very low capital. It takes a little longer to get it done, but we had developed this capability in-house and done it 4 or 5 times. And then as the world was ready to start growing aluminum again, aluminum is a cyclical commodity. Sometimes everybody wants to increase production, other times everybody's shutting it down. And it happened to be a booming time. And so we thought, why don't we try to sell this? Like, we've done it ourselves. Maybe we can sell this as a technology to others. And so we had an opportunity actually with a smelter in Saudi Arabia that we already had some relationship with that overall business. And so the question was, let's see if we can sell this to them. Their alternative was to build a whole new line using essentially the world leading supplier of new aluminum production lines. So the challenge for me, one was, okay, do we want to try this? How do we go from never having done this before in terms of technology sales to having done it to trying it for the first time? So that's not so much a leadership challenge as just trying, figuring out how to do those sorts of things. Leadership challenge for me personally was that this isn't a facility that I was not allowed to go to. Just the restrictions in this particular location were no facility. And so I had to decide, okay, option A is that I take the project that I had been leading internally, and maybe, I prepare my lieutenant as best as I can, right, to be the one to pitch this project. That's option A. Option B is to try to debottleneck the restrictions and be the one to do it myself. At the heart of, despite all the degrees I have and all the experience I have, I think at the very heart of who I am as a leader, from watching my dad, who was in the Army, enlisted, and we never really talked about leadership, but I would watch him and sometimes wonder, why are you working late? Or one of the things I remember is, why, when we're stationed in Germany, why don't we ever get to go home for the holidays? And he said, because I'm the leader and I let people do that. I let them have the benefits, take the easier route. And, I work late, I stay because I don't want them, I don't want them to be without their leader. Okay. So now comes this, and I'm like, okay, I don't want my team to be without their leader. I mean, I'm the leader of this organization. I'm also the best pitcher, right, in this team. I mean, there's like me, and then there's, super deep technical people. So not only is it that I want to be with them, but honestly, I'm probably the best one to sit in a room with a bunch of executives and explain how this thing's going to work. So I said, let's do it. let's me to go, and we did. I mean, there's a lower level Saudi prince who signed something so that I could show up. I got the clothes. I had cultural training. And this picture that says reserved for lady visitor, that's one of my favorite pictures ever in my career, because that is the bathroom that was made for me for the week that I was there, because there's no women facilities. So they did what they needed to do to make it feel like it was okay for me to be there, and stuck a sign on it. So that was my place. My presentation, half the room got up and left because it wasn't really appropriate for me to be there. They didn't want to hear from me. Fortunately, the people that stayed listened to what I said, told them how I could get them more aluminum production for a third of the price. They went with the incumbent, and we won the contract, $16 million contract or something. And then I'm the project lead, right? So I'm moving the project, and by the time I left Alcoa, the leader of that project went from leaving in my first presentation saying, Angelique, can you just call me once a month so we can talk and hang out? And Angelique, I'm going to be coming to the US for a visit. I put you down as my primary contact on my visa. That was okay. Sure, that's fine. But that was not easy. I cried a lot, especially the first time in the presentation, and half the people got up. And oh, by the way, I have to, because things were separated, my team stayed near a plant site, and I took a 90-kilometer hotel ride every day back to the hotel to stay at a Western hotel. But we did it. It happened. It tested my own leadership. And what I did at the time, but what I learned later was, I mean, if you think about that situation, how much consent authority do you think I earned organization by doing all of it? I earned the maximum amount of consent authority that you can possibly earn by doing that. So it doesn't mean that you have to be the type of leader who does that. I mean, it's a specific decision, a specific situation, a weird kind of one-off situation. But it is important for you to understand the kind of leader that you are, because I'm sure you'll be faced with some sort of challenge that you weren't expecting. And what are you going to do? I don't know. But you should know. You should know at the end what you're going to feel about. I knew that I was not going to feel good about sending my lieutenant in there to try to do this work. Okay, so those are the three groups of people, three pieces. So I said early on, I screwed it. I screwed up the ecosystem big time. I started to get celebrating wins correctly. I think I started to know myself. And so now let's talk about how I put this all together recently. So fireworks. July 4th, 2020 will be seared into my brain, I think, for the rest of my life, because I was supposed to be driving to North Carolina to pick up my kids. They were staying with my parents. We were gonna have a nice barbecue. I'm packing up the car, and I grabbed my work cell phone, which I wasn't even gonna bring because I was on vacation. And one nice thing about working in Europe is like they really respect your vacation. But I pick up my phone and it's like, emergency, emergency, call me, call me. And I was like, okay, what's going on? And he's like, chairman of the board has a meeting with Elon Musk on July 4th. You need to make some presentations. Okay, fine. I mean, that's not a leadership challenge, right? Making slides for a higher up is not a leadership challenge. Okay, fine, no problem. I'll make my slides. And so I make my slides, and he says, we're gonna do a dry run tomorrow. Okay, fine, call my mom. Mom, I'm gonna be a day late. I got this presentation, it's really exciting. So I make my slides, give them to the boss. Chief Marketing Officer is gonna do the presentation. And during the dry run, the Chief Marketing Officer gets 90 seconds in, and the CEO says, Angelique needs to give this presentation. okay, also not a leadership challenge. I mean, exciting, like, but not a leadership challenge. So I give the presentation in this surreal thing on July 4th, 2 billionaires and me, definitely not a billionaire, our board chairman, Elon Musk and me were talking. And I had this sense that all I really needed to do was keep the level of interest up, right? That's all I really had to do. I mean, we didn't even really know what the meeting was about. All I had to do was just try to get another phone call or, I mean, that was really my only task. So we did that. So we do the presentation. Elon says, I'd like to have a technical workshop with your team in a couple of weeks. Okay, great. Also not a leadership challenge, exciting. But the challenge comes when we start to realize what they actually want. And one of that they're looking for is just to make some prototypes so that they can test some materials for their project. We're an R&D lab, we make prototypes all the time, no problem. To meet their timeline, we got to do it 4 times faster than we've ever done it. Okay, so on the one hand, we hadn't committed to anything. And the board chair basically said, I want this business. I really want you to be able to do this, but don't commit to something that you can't do to this individual because I'm not, you're not going to embarrass me. I refuse to be embarrassed. I mean, basically said, he didn't say it, but it was obvious that I was going to lose my job if I committed to do this and didn't follow through. And maybe not even just my job, like maybe they might take my visa. I mean, they might make it so I'll never get to go back to Europe, who knows? So that was the leadership challenge. Was I gonna go after this? And to be honest, my first question was, could we even do it? Like, I didn't know. I mean, I knew how long it took us and I knew what their target was, but I didn't know if it was actually physically possible to get from point A to point B. So I started first with my makers and said, here's what we need to do. Do you think we could do it? And they're just like, okay, and they start to describe to me each individual step in the process and how it all works. And I'm like, so each individual step, if I add them all together, it takes 1 month. Why is it normally taking us like 8? And then they talk about all of the stakeholders they have to engage. Well, stakeholders they don't engage, but just end up waiting on, right? So, well, we say we start, but then we need a purchase order and they're super slow. Oh, and then we might need a development agreement and legal just takes forever. And then we've got to make it in this lab and then transfer it to this other lab for the next step in the process. And sometimes they don't, we have to wait. And so what I realize is that in reality, because they're not engaging and managing stakeholders, they're just waiting. So, okay, I actually think we can do this. So leadership question, are you willing to put your job on the line for something you think you can do? The answer is yes. Leadership question, do you think you've earned enough consent authority to get all of these stakeholders to go faster than they normally have? My answer was yes. Their answer was yes, but we're still French, so we're going to take vacation. If you don't get this done before vacation starts, you're on your own, which fortunately I did. And then it's just a matter of, it was me and the lowest level technician in the organization, because she couldn't go on vacation yet, managing to make these prototypes with 2 days to spare. And basically, all the good things we were hoping would happen by impressing them did happen, which was really interesting for me because it created it was great. We celebrated. The win that my team wanted actually was acknowledgement from the high-level leaders. And so I got them to write an email congratulating everybody, saying how proud they were of our efforts. And that was all they wanted. They got it. And so that was a huge success. where I put all the pieces of the leadership tools that I'm telling you about together. It also had me realize that my work was done and I was ready to do something different. So I wasn't having fun anymore. And so I left actually several months after that. That was the one project they were potentially interested in me keeping on. Would you say as a consultant? Nah, no thanks. So that's how you can put all of those pieces together. Now, for you, are the chances that you're going to have to try to do something faster than you ever did before for Elon Musk's team? I don't know. That was a one-off for me. That was a once in a lifetime thing. It's never happen again. But are you going to have some stakeholder who is going to pressure you to do something faster, to do something with maybe better quality than you've ever done before? Of course. I mean, there's a high probability that that's going to happen to you at some point in this innovation journey. And so, are you going to go after it? Have you earned the discretionary time, the consent authority from all the people that need to help you? Are they motivated? Do they feel like valued? I don't know. I hope so. That's the only way it will work. Okay, so that's it. This is just a summary of my main recommended resources if you want to pursue any of these comments that I talked about. So relative to the ecosystem, there's a really great podcast that I like called Manager Tools, and they give very actionable advice. Anything you could think of related to management and sort of identifying stakeholders, putting together a communication plan so that you're talking to them in a systematic way. There's podcasts on that. In terms of makers, Celebrate Wins, there's a book from Harvard. In terms of the maker's schedule, I wrote a short post on LinkedIn about how I managed it with my team. I also included a link to Paul Graham's original blog post on the maker's schedule. And if you want to talk about knowing yourself and your own personal leadership, there's the book on emotional intelligence, this kind of seminal work from Daniel Goleman. And then I personally like John Maxwell as somebody who talks about leadership. There's lots of different leadership thought leaders. I have all my dad's books with his notes in them, so that's why John is particularly helpful for me. That's it. Thank you. Questions, comments, concerns?
Notes because I went with my dad to see him speak.
Oh, really?
Yeah, when I was